let's talk Oregon wide receivers here, because I think this is the most talented Oregon wide receiver room over a 2-year period of my entire life. You have a 4th-round draft pick in Troy Franklin, who might be talking about him a little bit later in today's show when we get to Bo Nix, who just had the best statistical receiving season in the history of Oregon football, set the record for touchdowns, and had tied for the receptions mark with Tez Johnson, also on last year's team. And then Troy Franklin opted out of the bowl game, and then Tez Johnson played in the bowl game, so he set the receptions record. But Franklin only set the record for touchdowns and receiving yards in a single year. But this room is so crazy deep. And to go from Troy Franklin to Evan Stewart, who will probably get drafted higher whenever he declares, whether that's after this season or if he stays for his senior year, than Troy Franklin, pretty crazy. And Junior Adams has done a heck of a job. But Nick sends in this question, which all of you can do as well. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter. Send me a note. If you want priority access, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Go join the flock. That link is in the description below, wherever you listen to or watch this show. Not sure if it's a worthy question. I think it is, Nick. You've talked about overall most likely breakout players. To narrow it down, who do you believe is most likely to break out this year, Dickey or Kasper? Dickey has the hype and Kasper has some hype, but the time and the program. Just for the heck of it, Harmon/Caldwell, who has the biggest impact this year? We'll get to that second question because I think it's a really interesting one, because those are Oregon's 2 starting defensive tackles. But the Jurrion Dickey, Kyler Kasper question, are either going to break out, I think is a valid point to raise. Of the 2, I'd say Jurrion Dickey has a higher likelihood to have his most impactful season to date, even though it's just his 2nd season of college football. He wasn't really healthy last year. Kyler Kasper was a former highly touted blue chip wideout, wasn't quite as highly rated as Dickey, but still pretty big time recruit. I don't know if you watched the 2nd episode of That Team Out West, but Kyler Kasper made the sort of catch that I have long talked about on this show that he's capable of making and can be a big-time receiver for the Ducks. The reason I lean towards Jurrion Dickey is because of the positional versatility. Kasper is in the 6'5", 6'6" sort of range and plays primarily on the outside. That's where he projects to play. I guess we don't truly know because he hasn't been given a major shot yet in the college game. But Jurrion Dickey, one of the reasons he was a more highly touted recruit is that he can play outside and he can play inside. He has a little bit more yards after catch to his game. So when you look at the depth chart for this Oregon wide receiver room, Evan Stewart's going to start at X, Trayshawn Holden starts at Z, and Tez Johnson starts as your slot. Who's backing those guys up? My guess, Kyler Kasper backs up Evan Stewart. Jurrion Dickey backs up probably Tez Johnson, or is it Trayshawn Holden? Depends on where they like him. And Gary Bryant Jr. is in the mix as well. And Gary Bryant Jr. is likely to be Oregon's 4th receiver again this year, as he was a season ago. He and Trayshawn Holden had pretty similar numbers last year, and I'm a big Trayshawn Holden fan. But Kasper has got more guys in front of him that are playing on the perimeter, whereas Gary Bryant Jr., yeah, he can play in the slot, but I think that opportunity to have more targets in place of Gary Bryant is more readily available than to get more targets in place of Evan Stewart or Trayshawn Holden. Now, Gary Bryant Jr. could also be a backup Z receiver because he has also played on the outside in his Oregon career and is a very versatile player, much like Jurrion Dickey. I think the 2 are pretty similar. Dickey, I think, is maybe an inch or 2 taller and has some more 50-50 ball capability to his game. At least that's what you see on his high school tape. But another question for Jurrion Dickey, is he going to be healthy? Because he suffered an injury in the spring game. Reports the last reports that I've seen say that he's okay, doing better, but I don't know that we know that 100% certain. And anytime a guy was banged up last year and got banged up and had to leave the spring game, it's easy to raise a question. But if Kyler Kasper is trying to get catches or just get snaps and see the field, and he's got Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden ahead of him, I think it's a lot easier to get snaps over Gary Bryant, who I like, but not as much as the other 2, than it is to get snaps on the perimeter. So that's why I'd lean towards Jurrion Dickey. But quite frankly, the answer to this question, I don't expect either to have a major role. Because I watched this receiving core produce at a level that we really haven't seen in the modern era of Oregon football, and you bring in an NFL caliber guy to replace your departed NFL wide receiver, I kind of think that's going to be the rotation. So barring an injury, which is the other consideration, if Evan Stewart, God forbid, were to go down with an injury, Trayshawn Holden probably slides over to the X spot, and Gary Bryant Jr. becomes the Z. That'd be my guess. Whereas if Tez Johnson goes down with an injury, they could put Gary into the slot, or they could put Dickey into the slot. And I think it's more likely that Dickey would get more reps in the slot than Kasper would get more reps on the perimeter. Just my gut feeling at this point. But do I still like Jurrion Dickey, Kyler Kasper? Yeah, going into 2025, if those two are called upon to be major receiving threats, I'm good with that. Both have got a unique skill set. Both are incredibly talented, and both will be really experienced. I mean, Kyler Kasper is going into his third year of college football and has not had a significant role. Now, maybe Junior Adams increases the frequency of rotations at the wide receiver position this year, but based on the results they had last year, it's kind of hard to argue with it. It's hard to look at that and say, well, you should, really change things up and work more guys in the fold. Really? Do you need to? What was wrong with Oregon's passing game last year? Last I checked, the answer was nothing. So if you go with if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of approach, then I think that limits the time that either guy will see on the field this year. And if one or both stick around in the offseason, decide not to transfer out, come into Oregon next year, yeah, they'd be leading candidates to be starting wide receivers given the experience they have in Eugene already. But going into this year, it's just barring a slew of injuries, it's a tough depth chart to try and crack because it's such a talented room. As for your second question, Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, I'm legitimately at a coin flip here. I know it sounds like I'm not taking a stand, but between the two, Harmon's got a little bit more pedigree. So I'd go 55-45. Derek Harmon has a bigger impact than Jamari Caldwell, just because Caldwell, who was an all Big 12 conference guy, you look at what the Big 12 produces in the trenches compared to what Harmon was going against in the Big 10. Harmon's got more impressive tape when you have that consideration. But I also watched Jamari Caldwell in the spring game. Boy, he looks like a really good football player. And so does Harmon. DJ Harmon as Derek DJ. I think he's going by DJ Harmon. And I'm stoked about both of these additions. Caldwell came in first, and I liked Oregon's defensive line. Harmon came in, and I loved Oregon's defensive line. And I do love it. I think it's the best Oregon defensive line in 10 years since the DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead unit. I don't think there's the high-end talent that those two guys were, but I think the overall depth is much, much stronger for this year's team. And it's why I think Oregon's defense can be so good, because they have a bunch of talent and they have a ton of depth. And I think both of these guys, like I said, 55-45, Derek Harmon, I won't be shocked if it's Caldwell. I will not be shocked. I think whoever has the better statistical season, and it can be hard to put up numbers as a defensive tackle, may very well come down to how Tosh Lupoy and Dan Lanning and Tony Tuioti work their defensive line rotations. How many times do they move Jordan Birch inside? And who does that nudge out? If you want to have a little bit more of a pass rush oriented unit, do you think that's a Jamari Caldwell situation or a DJ Harmon situation to pair with Jordan Birch? Those are your inside guys, and then your outside players are two of the edge rushers that I've talked about at length on the show over the last several months, Tuioti and Purchase and Mateo. Maybe five-star true freshman Elijah Rushing works his name into the fold. So, I love both of those guys along the defensive line. I think because of the number of talented players Oregon has up there isn't going to be a defensive lineman who puts up some crazy stats, but I love the unit across the board.